Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this fly tying video we're going to talk about one of the most important tools at your fly tying bench, and that's your scissors. Stay tuned. Like with so many things in life, I tend to learn things the hard way or through experience, and I can definitely connect those thoughts to the topic of this video, which is fly tying scissors. This is my very first pair of fly tying scissors. I've had these for over 25 years. I used these for about the first 5 years of my fly tying, and man, these things cut everything. Dry flies, wet flies, streamers, deer hair flies, wires, it didn't matter. If it related to fly tying, it was getting cut with these scissors. And eventually they started to become dull, and I figured it must be because they were a cheap pair of scissors. It couldn't have been because of anything I did, right? Well, I've fortunately learned over the years that they dulled very quickly, and it was because I wasn't really using them for what they were intended. So what I plan on doing in this video is going through a couple things related to scissors. First, I'm going to talk just about scissors in general. What are some characteristics that I look for whenever I'm buying fly tying scissors? I'm also going to talk about what applications I like to use them, and I'll talk a little bit more about that specifically whenever I go through the fly tying scissors that I use on a regular basis. I'll talk through each one, just spend a minute or two talking about some pros, possibly some cons about them, and then finally what I'll do is give you a close-up of each of them, put them next to something so you can kind of see what they look like in terms of a certain fly and kind of see a little bit more about the application or the applications in which I use them. At the end of the video, I'm going to say the same thing that I'm about to say right now, and that's that I've used, we'll say, X amount of scissors over the last 25 years, but I guarantee I haven't used all the scissors that you have used. So by no means am I saying that if these are the scissors that I use, these are the only scissors that are great out there. I am absolutely not saying that. What I'd like you to really do is listen to these thoughts and hopefully contribute some of your own. If you've had a pair of scissors for the last 5 years that they are that pair of scissors that you could not live without, then please make mention of those scissors in the comments section below on this YouTube page, because not only am I sure that others would love to hear about the quality of the scissors that you've used, but more importantly, I would love to hear about that too, because like most of you out there, I am always looking for a really quality fly tying tool, and that includes scissors, because to me, these are one of the most important tools at your fly tying bench. And if there are some other great pairs out there, I really want to know about them. So please be sure to comment after watching this video. Well, with all of that said, let's get started. I'm first going to get into my thoughts about scissors in general. To me, one of the greatest indicators of a quality pair of fly tying scissors is looking for very thin blades that taper the whole way down to an extremely fine tip. That thin tip is very crucial for my fly tying, because I want to know that I'm able to get the fly tying scissors in there, trim the thread away, trim an individual fiber, trim some material as close to the hook as possible. And it doesn't seem like there's tons of pairs of scissors out there that can do that with such precision. Something else that I've tended to notice in some of the scissors that I own is that they seem to be a little heavier than others. It's almost like their weight is significant. So sometimes whenever I'm looking to buy a new pair of fly tying scissors, I'll pick them up, and I'm not going to say that every heavy pair of scissors is a higher quality than all the others, but there does seem to be some type of connection, at least in the ones that I own. The other thing that I like to look for whenever I'm checking out these fly tying scissors is whether or not they have any serrations, which basically means as you look inside when you have them open, they might have little grooves going the opposite direction of the blades. What's nice about those serrations is that they can be used to almost grip certain fibers as you're cutting. I can tell you that on my very fine scissors, I typically don't have those with serrations, but as I kind of move up and as I have some scissors for cutting wires, I really prefer to have those serrations in there. They just seem to grip really well, and they seem to clamp down as they make that cut. Next, there are some scissor sharpeners out there, but I can tell you that I have personally never sharpened a pair of fly tying scissors that I've owned. I'm not sure if that's because, I don't want to say that's because I haven't had the need to, but at least in my opinion, I felt that if I'm using my scissors correctly, they're going to stay sharp for a significant period of time. I can tell you that the two pairs that I'm using right now are still very sharp, and I've been using them together for over, we'll say, 7 years. I've had, just nothing but success with them. And that's going to relate to kind of my next thought, and that's that we really have to use these fly tying scissors correctly. If there's a pair of fly tying scissors that I tend to use on nothing but delicate fibers, then I'm going to really ensure that I use them on nothing but delicate fibers. I'm going to be showing you a pair of fly tying scissors that I really use to cut nothing more than bead chain eyes, and I can tell you they're the only pair that I'll use to do that. A funny story that I like to tell related to scissors is that in some of my fly tying videos, I kind of get caught up in tying the fly, and I try to do it in one continuous shot. So if that pair of scissors for cutting wires isn't out, whatever pair that I have close by, that's the pair that I'm going to use to cut that wire. And I did that in a few videos, and one of my buddies, his name's Tim Abbott, he builds beautiful bamboo fly rods, watched one of the videos, saw me and flipped out saying, "Tim, why are you using those sharp scissors to cut wire? You're gonna just completely dull those scissors." And I explained to him my rationale, but he was absolutely right. I wasn't using them correctly, and I was being a terrible example for others and just grabbing my scissors and using them to cut whatever. And I really have to stress that we have to absolutely use these scissors correctly. And if we do that, they're going to stay sharp a lot longer. Now, something else that is kind of out there to consider is I've noticed a lot of fly tyers, they tie and they keep their scissors in their hand while they tie. I'm not going to lie, I've tried it many times. I tried it for a week at a time, then I went away from it. Then I came back to it just thinking maybe that will help speed up my tying. As of right now, I don't tie with scissors in my hand. I kind of keep them in one or two spots on my bench. I grab them as needed. It probably does not make my fly tying the most efficient, but it's just the most comfortable for me. But I can tell you that if there's a way that you can keep your fly tying scissors in your hand while you tie, it might help speed up the efficiency of your tying, though be careful when you're doing it at first. I don't want you to jab anything or anyone as you're tying. And finally, and most importantly, make sure you're smart with your scissors. Whenever you're handing them to somebody else, you should always grip them with the blade facing down. So whenever they grab them from you, they're pulling the loops. Number two, and something to really keep in mind, is that whenever you're placing them back down on your bench, make sure you're placing them back away, because I can tell you from experience, I had a really nice pair of fly tying scissors. I placed them close to the edge. I knocked into them, I bumped them, and when they fell point first and just completely dinged up those tips and basically really upset me because they just weren't the same after that. So make sure you're smart with them, and I can tell you that again, like I said at the beginning, I have learned a lot of this stuff through experience, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well. Next, I'm going to go into talking about the specific pairs of fly tying scissors that I use. I'll just hold them up so that you can see them throughout that section, and then I'm going to finish up by kind of zooming in on each pair. I'm going to break this next section into two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the three pairs of scissors that I use for about 95% of my fly tying. And then in the second part, I'm going to talk about, we'll say, cutting tools that I use around my tying bench. But let's get to the three pairs that I use most often. And easily right now, my number one pair of fly tying scissors are made by Dr. Slick, and they're called the Razor Scissors, and they have a tensioner. Now, let me talk about the number one reason why I love these scissors, and that's because they have really thin blades that taper down to an extremely sharp tip. It is such a fine tip, and I can tell you, after I used this pair of scissors for a week or two, I immediately bought multiple pairs of them because I knew that this was going to be a pair of fly tying scissors that I would use for a long time, and I really wanted to make sure that nothing happened and that I would have pairs stashed away for years to come. I'm sure Dr. Slick is not going out of business, but I know if there's something that you love out there, you should get multiple ones of that item, because you never know what's going to happen in the future. So aside from the fact that they have very thin blades, they have that really fine tip, that really sharp tip, they have this tensioner as well, which can basically help you to adjust how much tension is placed on those two blades whenever they come together. I can tell you that it looks really fancy, but that after I had it adjusted once, I really haven't touched it since. Instead, whenever I think about this pair of scissors, number one, they're very heavy. They have a significant weight to them. Number two, they just feel really comfortable in my hands. And number three, they have that really fine tip, and it comes to just a perfect point. And finally, they're extremely sharp. Be careful if you purchase these scissors. They are a great pair of scissors. They look nice. You can just tell their quality. The only downside to these scissors is that they cost a little bit more than all the other scissors that I use. In my mind, that's definitely well worth it because I know I'm going to be using these for years, but kind of going back to that last section, I know I'm going to really be smart with this pair of scissors. I'm not going to drop them. I'm not going to put them in any situation where something might happen to the blades because I really just appreciate having this pair. The next pair that I'm going to talk about is similar, but this is a curved set. So whenever I show you the close-up, you might be able to see this a little bit better. This is a pair of fly tying scissors from Tiemco, and these are called the Tiemco curved scissors. They're just a hair longer than the Dr. Slicks, and by a hair I'm talking about maybe a quarter inch, half inch at the most. And the first thing that kind of caught me with them is that they're not the heaviest pairs of scissors, but whenever I bring the blades together, they have a really crisp sound to it. And I think you probably know what I mean, that scissor sound that whenever you hear it, it just sounds like it's going to cut. And boy, do these scissors cut. I don't believe that they're as sharp as the Dr. Slicks, but I used these for at least 6, maybe 5 years prior to buying the Dr. Slicks, and they are still cutting great today. The reason I like the curved blade is that I like to know that, and there's certain flies that I might tie that I really can't get just the tips in there. So if I am going to make a cut, I know that the tips are going to be arched away from the fly and I'm not going to be damaging any other materials that are part of that fly. I don't want to tell you that you need a pair of these curved tips. You don't necessarily need a pair. Can you tie most of your flies with a curved tip pair of scissors? Absolutely. If I was going between this pair and Dr. Slick, I can tell you I'm going to recommend those razor scissors every time. They're just a much more, we'll say a higher quality pair of scissors, but I can tell you, at least in my mind, these are a close second. And then finally, the third pair of scissors that I use quite a bit at my fly tying bench are a pair of what we're going to call serrated scissors that are made for, we'll say, wire cutting. Now, these don't have a little gap in them that's placed specifically within one of the blades that's meant to cut pieces of wire, but this pair of scissors was marketed as a pair of scissors that's meant to cut those wires if you're tying copper johns and if you're tying lots of nymphs, if you're using deer hair. This stuff really cuts through them. This pair cuts through them really well. Now, I would love to tell you the brand, except last time I checked, they are no longer producing these scissors. So I'm not sure if I were to tell you to get a pair of these, but what I can tell you to look for is a pair of medium serrated blades that are intended to cut wire. These also have a tensioner on them, though I can tell you these did not cost as much as the Dr. Slick pair of scissors. They are a little bit longer than the razors, and by a little bit, we're talking about inch and a half longer. If you need the actual sizes, just send me an email or place a comment down below and I'll get you the actual length of these if that will possibly help in your search. But the brand isn't really important. What's kind of important to note is that this is a pair of scissors that I use to cut those materials that will dull my Dr. Slicks. So kind of keep that in mind. I'm going to be using these on deer hair because deer hair is relatively abrasive and it will dull scissors really fast. Keep that in mind if you're tying with a lot of deer hair. I'll use this on wires. I'll use this if I need to cut some heavy duty material that I know that I don't want to damage my other blades. So you don't focus on just a brand, focus on a pair of scissors that you can buy to kind of beat up. But at the end of the day, I still wanted a pair of scissors that are relatively fine. They're nowhere near as fine as those previous two, but they still have a nice taper to them and they come to a significant point. So with that said, those are the three pairs of scissors that I use, again, like 95% of the time. Next, I'm going to talk about my 5% club. And these are just kind of those cutting tools that I believe you should have at your fly tying bench. I give a recommendation pretty frequently that relates to tying flies that you know you're probably never going to use. Maybe they came out wrong in terms of the proportions, or you used a little bit too much thread over the eye of the hook and you can't get a tippet in there, or maybe you were attempting to match a certain color scheme of a bait fish, but it didn't come out quite right. Instead of taking that fly out and losing it somewhere on your fly tying bench or placing it into that back corner of your fly box where it's going to end up in Never Never Land, instead keep it in your vise and get all of those materials off of it. then tie that pattern again, and hopefully it will come out a little bit better. And I can tell you that that's something that I do on an occasional basis when one doesn't come out quite right. But instead of grabbing my fly tying scissors and trimming all of that stuff off with them, I reach for one of these. And this is a retractable box cutter that has basically miniature razor blades inside of it. And what's nice about them is that they're able to snap off, so you have a fresh one occasionally. Now, whenever I say razor blades, I shouldn't say it like that. There's just one razor blade inside of them, but there's these little grooves that are cut within this blade, and it's a relatively sharp blade. This is not what I would say is a precision instrument, but it's definitely sharp. There's no doubt about it. So whenever I'm cutting different materials off of the hook with that, or using this for other things at my fly tying bench, maybe for cutting strips out of certain materials, these blades will eventually dull. Whenever they do, I can simply just grab them with a pair of pliers, snap them off, throw that little section off, and then extend it out, and there's another section that will pop right out, and it's very sharp, which is a great thing to keep in mind. This has a little locking mechanism, and the blade hides when it's not in use. Another great thing about this is that maybe there's something that you're not sure whether you should cut it or not with your higher quality pair of fly tying scissors. Turn to this instead. That way you don't have to worry about damaging that pair of scissors. The great thing about this is that these are very cheap. I'm talking less than $1. I don't think I've ever paid more than 89 cents for one of these. I'm sure if you do an internet search, you can probably find a 10-pack for $5, and that may even include shipping to your front door. Who knows? The downside, this is not what I would call the highest quality tool by any means. Sometimes you don't even make it to the end of all those blades. The actual plastic may come apart. So kind of keep that in mind, but it's a great tool to have at your fly tying desk, and you never know when you can turn to this to use something. Another tool that I use on a relatively regular basis is related to that previous one, and it's just another type of razor blade, but this is a flexible razor blade. It's basically bendable. This one that I'm holding was made by Schick. I can't tell you where or when I bought this pack of razor blades, whether or not they even still make them, but what I can tell you is great about these is that because they're bendable, you can use these on a variety of different flies. The most common one that I use them with is whenever I'm tying with deer hair, maybe some type of deer hair popper or just a regular deer hair head. What's great about it is I don't like to use scissors on those deer hair heads because they're so fine and I have to make so many cuts. Plus, deer hair really dulls scissors quickly. So instead I turn to razor blades, and these bendable ones are great because I can basically grip them with one hand, bend them to whatever shape I want, and then just cut off any of those materials right immediately off of the hook, and that deer hair really just zips right off with these blades. So having razor blades is great at the fly tying bench. Again, make sure you're storing them safely, but these bendable ones are definitely the ones that I recommend. And then finally, the last, we'll say, cutting tool that I have at my bench, I keep these in the drawer next to my bench. This is a pair of these cheap scissors. I don't know how else to say it. They have kind of a goofy little angle to them. Somebody gave these to me for, I don't know, Christmas or at some point in my life. And on the packaging, I remember it said they are sharp enough to cut a penny. And I remember, I'm not sure if I should admit this because I think it's illegal, but I cut a penny in half and they worked. And I thought to myself, wow, I don't know if I really need to cut pennies in half, but I guarantee there's going to be some stuff that whenever I'm tying flies, I could use a really heavy duty pair of scissors, and this is them. They have a very heavy serration down this one side, whereas the other blade is smooth. The name on them, it says Autoclave 143C. I'm not even sure if they still make these, but I did a quick Google search, and if you search for super shears or scissors that can cut through a penny, a pair will come up like this. They are not expensive by any means. I think they're going to be under $5. I cut a lot of bead chain eyes with this. Any heavy duty metal, this is the pair that I turn to. I can tell you I've had these for at least 15 years. I've cut some really heavy duty materials, and these blades have really started to kind of bow apart whenever I've cut them. And I thought, geez, this is it. They're gonna break, and they're still going strong today. So this is that goofy pair of scissors that I have at my bench that has worked for really that heavy duty cutting, and I recommend you finding a pair that's similar too. Well, now that I've kind of gone through all that, what I do want to mention is that I'll provide a link, or at least the name of all of these scissors, at the bottom of the video in the description section, just in case you're interested in, looking at them more specifically, finding out from the vendor that sells them or from the manufacturer a little bit more information about them. So if you didn't take a moment to write down all of those, they will be listed in the description. And if I can find a link to either that pair of scissors or one similar, I'll do so in the comments section, in the description of the video. Well, the next thing I'd like to do is kind of zoom in on each of them so you can see them from a little bit of a closer perspective, and then I'll wrap up with my final thoughts. I'll show you these in the order in which I originally talked about them. So first, we have the Dr. Slick. You can see that they really do have such a fine tip and very fine blades. So here's just a quick close-up of these scissors. So you have kind of a measurement reference. They're exactly 4 inches long. So those are the Dr. Slick razor. Next we have the Tiemco. You can see the blades are just a little thicker than the Dr. Slicks. Kind of put them up for comparison purposes. I'm not sure if that's going to come in real well for this video. Just an overview of this scissor. And they are about 4 1/4 inches long. Next we have the pair that we're going to be using for really cutting wire. You can see they have the tensioner, thicker blades. So again, I'll use the Dr. Slick for references. I'll put them up next to them. You can see definitely a much thicker blade on the bottom. They have very significant loops, a much longer blade overall. Whenever I measure this one, it's coming out just a shade over 5 inches long. Let's see, I believe I talked about the box cutter next. Really nothing too crazy to mention about this one. A little locking feature. It goes up. I'm not sure if you'll be able to pick this up in the camera. I'll try to get the right angle. You can see kind of those little grooves, and those are the spots in which you tear off each of the blades. Next, I have the razor blade. You can see I've bent this one to work with a certain deer hair fly that I tie a lot of. And then finally, I'm going to end with this. We'll call them super shears or something really similar. Very large pair. And they are going to measure at about 7 1/2 inches long. So that was just a little zoom up, a little close-up look of all these fly tying scissors. Now that I'm finished sharing all of my fly tying scissors with all of you, I want to mention that aside from placing links for each one of them in the description of this video, I'm also going to be placing a link for a great article written on fly tying scissors by Martin Jorgensen. Martin's out of the globalflyfishing.com site. I think it might be globalflyfisher.com. And he wrote this incredible article in which he talked about the different characteristics of fly tying scissors. He kind of talked about them specifically, broke each part down, and then he got his hands on a bunch of different pairs and wrote a brief review for each of them. So by all means, check that link out. Well, with all of that said, I really do appreciate you watching this video on fly tying scissors. And if you have your first pair still, please hold on to them, maybe pull them out every now and then and use them for nostalgia purposes. If you're still tying with your first pair and you're starting to realize this may not be the best pair of scissors, I hope this video helped you at least to get some ideas and kind of turn you in certain directions as to where to head if you're looking for that quality pair of fly tying scissors. And I can tell you that by all means, I really look at this as one of the most important tools on my fly tying bench. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, if there is a certain pair that you've been using now and I didn't mention them, please mention them in the comments section below. I tend to look at some of my comment sections on a lot of my videos as almost a resource page of its own. And I really am just so excited whenever I look down there and I see all the different comments that are listed. And I'm saying this really because I want to see what other scissors all of you are using, especially those ones that you love, that you say, this is a pair that I plan on using for the next 5 or 10 years. Those are the ones that I want to hear more about. Plus, if I missed any type of, we'll say a cutting tool that you feel is really essential to having at the fly tying bench, please mention it below in the comment section too. Well, with all of that said, again, thank you so much. And if you'd like to watch more of these fly tying or fly fishing videos, you can check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. I also have a Facebook page, and if you like that, you'll receive some regular fly tying and fly fishing updates. If you have any comments or questions regarding this video, you can leave them in the comment section below, or you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. Thanks again, everybody, for watching this fly tying video on fly tying scissors.